So you just said yes to something that you really meant to say no to. And right now, in this exact moment, there is a small voice inside of you that knows that it's already calculating how you're going to manage the thing that you just agreed to. It's already rehearsing how you'll make it work. It's already minimizing the cost. And underneath all of that, so quietly, you might not even register it, there is a feeling, a very specific kind of ache that has become so familiar, you've stopped noticing it. And that ache is the feeling of abandoning yourself. Not dramatically, not with awareness, just quietly stepping away from your own experience so that someone else's experience doesn't have to be disrupted. And this is not a character flaw. This is not you being too nice or too accommodating or any of the other words that people have probably used to describe you. This is actually a pattern, a very specific pattern with very specific behavior markers. And once you can see it, like really see it, the way I've learned to see it in my clinical work and in formal evaluations, things can finally start to change because awareness is one thing, but what comes next is something else. All right. So you can't interrupt what you cannot identify. So let me describe something and you tell me if you recognize it, right? Somebody asks, what do you want for dinner? And your first thought is not what you actually want. Your first thought is more like, what would be the easiest thing to do? Or what do they actually want to eat? What have they been talking about today? What would require the least amount of negotiation? Or you're in a conversation and someone says something and it lands kind of wrong. It's something dismissive or maybe just off. And instead of saying, that felt dismissive, instead of even registering that it felt dismissive, you move on. You move right past it. You keep the conversation going. You smooth over the moment before it even becomes a moment. Or someone asks you, how you doing? How you doing today? And without even thinking, you say, good, fine. I've been busy. You don't even pause to check to see if that is actually the truth because checking would slow things down. Checking would make you visible in a way that feels very uncomfortable. This is exactly what self-abandonment looks like. It's it's not dramatic. It's not a single moment of betraying yourself in some obvious way. It's 1,000 tiny moments turning down your own volume so that the room stays comfortable. And you probably don't even know that you're doing it most of the time because this pattern runs below the level of conscious choice. It runs at the same speed as the nervous system. So let's talk about how that actually works because understanding the mechanism is exactly what makes change possible. Self-abandonment is a nervous system strategy. It's not a personality trait. It's not who you fundamentally are. It is what your system learned to do in an environment where being yourself, having needs, taking up space, expressing a preference came with a cost. Maybe that cost was criticism or withdrawal. Maybe it was the silent treatment for an extended period of time or an explosion of anger or just a subtle shift in someone's energy that told you you've done something wrong by wanting something. And your system, which is incredibly intelligent and adaptive, learned a strategy. It learned if I make myself small, if I monitor what they need before I check what I need, if I stay slightly invisible, the cost goes down. This strategy worked. in the original environment. It genuinely kept you safer. It reduced conflict. It maintained connection, even if connection meant that you were not ever fully known. Now, the problem is your nervous system is still running that strategy right now in relationships where it's absolutely not required, in situations where you could have a voice, where you could take up space, where the person across from you actually wants to know what you think and what you're feeling. But the system doesn't know that. The the system has no idea that the environment has changed. It's still protecting you from a threat that may not even exist anymore. So now here's where my work as a forensic evaluator becomes relevant, because in formal evaluations, I don't just listen to what people tell me about themselves. I look for behavioral markers, specific patterns that show up consistently, regardless of what somebody's self report says. So let's talk about some of the markers that I actually look for. And I want you to take a minute and evaluate yourself the same way I would evaluate somebody in a formal assessment. Not with judgment, we're not judging, but with curiosity. So, marker number one is going to be chronic uncertainty about your own preferences. When asked, what do you want? There's a noticeable pause. Say, what do you want? And there's that, like, I don't know, right? Not because you're thinking about your preference, but because you're calculating what the right answer is. Marker number two is preemptive accommodation. You adjust your behavior, your schedule, your needs before anyone has even asked you to. You make yourself easier to be with as a default strategy. Marker number three, retroactive self-doubt. After you express an opinion or set a limit, there's an immediate internal questioning. Was that okay? Was I too much? Should I have not said that? Those are usually some of the questions that start to replay as we start to criticize and judge internally. All right. So, marker number four, emotional over responsibility. You feel responsible for other people's emotional states. If they're upset, something in you immediately calculates what you did wrong, even when you've done absolutely nothing. So, marker number five, a difficulty identifying your own feelings in real time. So, when something happens, you know how to manage it. You don't necessarily know how you feel about it. That information comes later, sometimes hours later, sometimes days later, and sometimes it never comes. And then marker number six, the gap between public presentation and private experience. You appear easygoing, flexible, accommodating. Inside, there is exhaustion, resentment, a vague sense of being fundamentally unseen. If you are recognizing yourself in those markers, just know this is not evidence that there is something wrong with you. This is evidence that your system developed a very sophisticated survival strategy, and that strategy is now visible to you in a way that it wasn't before. That visibility is the beginning of absolutely everything. So let's talk about what living in this pattern actually cost, because you've probably been minimizing the cost for years. The first cost is so important. It is the relationship with yourself. Every time you abandon yourself, every yes that was a no, every preference that you didn't voice, every feeling that you suppressed to keep the peace, you teach yourself something. You teach yourself that you are not trustworthy, that your own experience is not worth protecting, that you will betray yourself to maintain a connection. And then over time, that teaching, it accumulates, it continues to build until that one day comes and you look up and you realize, I don't even actually know what I want. I don't know who I am when I am not managing someone else's experiences. I've been so absent in my own life that I've become a stranger to myself. The second cost is the relationships that you're trying to protect. Because here's the paradox: the self abandonment designed to keep people close to you actually prevents real intimacy. You cannot be fully known by someone when you're not even fully present. You cannot be chosen for who you are when you've hidden who you are. So the person who loves you, they're loving a performance, a carefully managed version of you. And some part of you knows this, which is why their love never quite lands, why it never quite fills that hole that you feel inside, because the part of you that's being loved is not the whole you. And that's important because you do deserve that. So the third cost is your nervous system itself. Self abandonment is absolutely exhausting. The constant monitoring, the perpetual adjustments, the energy that it takes to track everyone else's experiences while simultaneously suppressing your own, that's not sustainable. It is just not sustainable. And your body knows that. Even if your mind has learned to override all the signals, your body is still trying to send the signals because it is not sustainable. So let's just place this into like a larger context, right? Because self-abandonment doesn't just show up in one relationship. It actually shows up in all of the relationships. So in my framework that I call the 7 relationships, I map out how patterns in one relational domain replicate across every other domain. The way you relate to yourself is the template for the way you relate to everyone and everything else. So if you abandon yourself in your relationship with a partner, if you make yourself small, if you don't voice your needs, if you manage their experience at the expense of your own, that same pattern is going to show up in how you relate to money, to your body, to your work, to your friendships, your faith, to your family, the community. The person who can't say no to their partner also can't say no to the extra project at work. It's the same person who undercharges in their business, the same person who also ignores the signals from their body and gives way more than they receive in friendships. And yeah, this pattern might keep the peace in family dynamics, but it's at your expense. It's the exact same pattern, different context, the same nervous system strategy, the same program is constantly running. And that's exactly why working on this pattern at the level of self, the level of what I call relationship 1, essentially, the relationship with you, it changes everything. It changes them all downstream, not because you become selfish or you stop caring about other people, but because you stop abandoning the one person that you are going to spend the rest of your life with. And that's you. So what do you do with all of this information? The first thing you do is you practice noticing, not changing, just noticing. When did I abandon myself? Have I abandoned myself today? What was the moment? What was the calculation that my system made? What was I afraid would happen if I didn't? That noticing, it's not judgment, right? It's data collection. You're learning to see your own pattern in real time, which is the only place where it can eventually be interrupted. The second thing that you're going to do is practice tolerance. Specifically, you practice tolerance at the discomfort of not abandoning yourself. Because here's what happens. The first time you voice a preference, an opinion, the first time you say no, the first time you let somebody be uncomfortable instead of managing their emotions for them, your nervous system will absolutely activate, and it is going to tell you that something is wrong. It is going to want you to do the thing that you always do. It's going to tell you that you've made a mistake and that your connections are at risk. That activation is not evidence that you did something wrong. That activation is the old pattern trying to reassert itself. Listening, learning to stay with that activation, to feel it without letting it drive your behavior, that is the actual work. Third, you practice repair with yourself. Every time that you notice that you've abandoned yourself, acknowledge it. Not with shame, but with honesty. You can say something like, I just did that damn thing again. And I said yes when I wanted to say no. And then you replace that and you say, you know what? I see you. I know what you just did. I know why you just did that. And I'm learning to do it differently. The repair is not about being perfect. It's about building a new relationship with yourself. One where you are no longer the person who is constantly betraying yourself. Listen, you learned to abandon yourself because at some point that was the safest option that was available to you. You learned that your needs were inconvenient, that your voice was too much, that the only way to keep people close to you was to make yourself smaller. That is not a character flaw. That is actually survival. But you're not in that environment anymore. And the strategy that kept you safe up until now is also the strategy that is keeping you invisible to other people and to yourself. You are not broken. You are patterned, and patterns can change. Not through willpower, not through trying to force yourself to be somebody different, but through seeing clearly, through understanding the mechanism, through building and reestablishing a relationship with the person that you have been abandoning your entire life. That relationship, the one with yourself, is where everything else begins. That is where the changes in all of the other areas in your life are able to happen. So listen, if this landed for you and you recognized yourself in what I described today, I want to invite you to go deeper. So what you can do is subscribe to the channel, like the video, stay tuned. We're going to go through all of the patterns, probably not all the scenarios because there's about 1 billion of them, but at least the patterns. Okay. So stay with me and we're going to get to work on this. I'll see you in the next one.